Hello, and welcome to our series, Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. I'm Russell Robinson, Chief Executive Officer of Jewish National Fund USA. The time has come to be the voice of what Zionism really is. We're exposing the beautiful and diverse facets and facts of Zionism. Join me on this journey, together with Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. This is Zionism. My guest today is Scott Shay, a leading banker, thought leader, and author of several critically acclaimed books on profound issues facing our Jewish community. The co-founder and chairman of Signature Bank, he is joining us here at ZTV to discuss his third book, Conspiracy U, a case study. Please welcome Scott Shay. Scott, welcome to Zionist Studios, to ZTV. I want to talk about Conspiracy U, your new book, your third book.
Yes.
But I want to talk about you. You're a banker, a business person, very successful. How does somebody like you decide that they're going to take on the Zionist movement and write about it, talk about it, and help lead it?
Well, one thing that you mentioned a lot of things about me, but one thing that's important to note is that I'm the only son of a survivor of the Holocaust. And my father imbued upon me the importance of the Jewish people, it was so important that people historically were willing to sacrifice their lives for it, because he didn't believe Jews should just continue on because Jews should continue on, but because we have an important message to be part of this world, to be a light unto the nations. I think it's so important, and I'm not the first one to say this, that you don't get too busy living a life that you forget to do what's important in life.
But I'm going to unpack that for our audience. You grew up in Chicago.
I did.
Your father village was 1941. I think the Nazis came into his village, right?
Yes.
And he was at work camp and in Auschwitz. Moves to Chicago. What's that moment that you decide that, you know what, I have to start raising the flag?
It was probably sometime in college. During my sophomore year, I read a professor, a fully tenured professor at Northwestern, who I write about in the book, Arthur Butts, who said the Holocaust was a myth. It was just a trumped up typhoid epidemic, not a big deal. And the Jews, what I didn't realize and what most people didn't realize is, yes, there are many people who say the Holocaust is a myth, and people just think they're neo-Nazis, but in essence, they're anti-Zionists. Butts says that the whole reason for this myth was to allow the Jews to usurp this land, was to allow Jews to make the rest of the world guilty and give the Jews Israel. Well, that is absolutely bunk, but yet people read it and believe it.
And there was silence.
Silence.
And
the university tried to ignore it at first.
Now, I was so fascinated with your book, and I'm going to tell everybody to get the book, Conspiracy U, because you did something that I had not seen done, and you did it on a very intellectual level, but you did it with a lot of research and a lot of detail to show sort of how the anti-Zionist movement gained its, quote, credibility, how it gained its strength, and the length of time that it took. So I want you to talk a little bit about what you found, what you write in the book, about the anti-Zionist movement and when did it really establish its aha moment?
Well, the important thing to know, and this is going to be a leitmotif, is that the anti-Zionist movement is not just from the far right, and it's not just from the far left. Both sides have been, and one thing that I think that the people who have read my book so far have been almost shocked. I mean, I've gotten I've gotten emails from people in mid-book, which is they didn't realize that literally some of the things that the far right are saying are almost identical to some of the things that the far left is saying. Again, here's the thing that is critical to remember. There's a total usurpation of language. Genocide ends up meaning different things. Anti-Semitism, which was, by the way, was a fancy word, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, is that it was a fancy word that was created by a guy by the name of Wilhelm Marr, who didn't like the existing word Jew hatred. So he wanted to come up with something fancier. So he didn't, anti-Zionism, that didn't exist in the late 19th century. So he said anti-Semitism. And with that, it became respectable. He created an anti-Semitism league. And again, it's not respectable to be anti-Jewish or to hate Jews, but it's certainly respectable to be an anti-Zionist. And if you Google anti-Zionism, you're going to find a whole host of people. But by the way, if you Google anti-Zionism.org, you're going to find that that's a far right site. So this goes back very far, and it goes back to, frankly, and unfortunately and sadly on the right, to Mein Kampf. It goes back to Hitler, where he decries in his book in 1925 that the Jews should never be able to get a state, because if they do, it'll be a worldwide headquarters for all sorts of bad stuff, which is, by the way, exactly what the left says. Somehow the Jews in Israel are brainwashing police departments all across the world, et cetera, et cetera. And we can go into any level of detail.
You're a sophomore now.
I'm a sophomore. I never left being a sophomore.
You read, but you were shocked. Yep. What do you do?
Well, I wrote a letter to the Daily Northwestern.
Right.
And I criticized, actually, primarily the administration, who I thought should know better. I said they didn't really react until after it became a bit of a brouhaha. And so they're reluctant and grudging statements.
Were you an activist before?
So this really sort of primed me, I would have to say. Mm-hmm. This was a defining moment.
And you penned a letter.
Yes.
You know that you're putting yourself out there.
Yes.
So you're silent no more, and you're doing something, and it started a conversation now.
Yes, it started a conversation, and it also made me recognize that there are a lot of haters out there, because in my internal mail from Northwestern, I started to get Nazi hate mail. Pretty, really stuff I had never seen, never dreamt the level of evil that could be put in a mailbox. And so that was also a wake-up call for me. I had never experienced personally even close to the casual anti-Semitism my father did, and anti-Jewish hatred, but I started to get a little bit of a glimpse of what it could be.
Well, just for our people in our audience under the age of 30, a mailbox is pre-social media. And it would be the postings that you would receive. But to imagine that here is, you open up your mailbox, you're getting these anti-Jewish and Nazi pamphlets that are thrown at you. And it's a wake-up call that you didn't have in a suburb of Chicago, that there was so much Jew hatred. Did you?
Well, I grew up in East Rogers Park, which was a diverse neighborhood, I think would be the word at the time. And I didn't grow up with much, but I don't want to say zero. There were a few I did pick up a little bit of casual anti-Semitism, but nothing that shocked me or that I couldn't just slough off. This was not possible to slough off. And disturbingly, when I went to the university, they did want to slough it off.
get involved in the Jewish community. You've written 2 books before this one.
Yep.
You wrote a book about how the Jewish community needs to get its groove back and establish itself. You wrote a book about God and spirituality. Why did you decide that now is the moment to write Conspiracy U?
It's not a book I actually wanted to write. What prompted me to write this book was that when my father's 75th anniversary of being liberated from Dachau came up, I wanted to write some sort of commemorative piece. And it was just going to be 2,500 words, some lessons that I learned from my father who really taught me that a lot of things need to be caught, not taught. And about that same time, there was some front page news. They had that a incoming professor of Northwestern, Stephen Thrasher, who had been made the Daniel H. Renberg Chair of Social Justice Reporting, an important slot that shapes many, many minds, had just given a commencement address at NYU where he jettisoned his prepared remarks, which had of course been approved, and instead went into a bit of a diatribe about how wonderful the BDS movement is and how so proud he was of his fellow students in his department for BDS. And there were whoops and cheers. You could watch this on YouTube as well, or at least at the time you could. And I realized that now at the north side of campus, you would have Arthur Butts, and at the south side of campus, you'd have Professor Thrasher. And then I started to do a little more research about how much was going on in between those two stars. And the truth of the matter is, I became increasingly disturbed. This is as a loyal supporter of Northwestern, someone who loved the school and so appreciated the opportunity that it gave me. And I was shocked.
So that's a very powerful statement, because it's a lot of people that I've been hearing from. Those people who love the football team, who are, have the banners of their university and wear the colors. And they're finding out from articles, and now they're going to find out from your book, about this really thoughtful anti-Zionist movement. And you talk about it in your book that this was not just something that happened. There was a lot of planful work that went in. It is a methodical, planful attack on Zionism. And so if you could give us some of those findings that you did in your book that shows that kind of hard work that they did on the ground to get them to the point where they are today.
Right. Well, there's a lot of hard work that was done all throughout. And it's both on the ground work and intellectual preparation work. And one thing that I note in the book is that there's no way that the Holocaust would have happened without intellectual preparation. There's no way it would have happened in Svexner. It's very important that people, when it came time to attack Jews, were mentally prepared for it and thought, this is okay. So I showed that on the far left.
I just want to stop, because I think that's a very, very powerful statement. And as you're talking about it, I'm thinking from Mein Kampf, from all of the pieces, that this wasn't just, let's decide to go do Kristallnacht tomorrow.
No.
There was a real methodical, planful, program to how to get to the point of Kristallnacht.
And I can't go into them all here because we have limited time, but I could spend the whole time talking about conspiracy theories in the 20s and 30s in Europe about Jews that were plentiful. It was just unbelievable how many conspiracy theories there were about Jews. Meanwhile, my father's family was dirt poor. They had 2 rooms and the animals lived in 1 room. But yet somehow they controlled the world. And somehow, I'm sure that they were probably controlling anthropology departments' tenure selection at the time too. I'm sure there were theories about that. They were just as inane, just as crazy, yet people were prepared to believe them about Jews. And if you go back and look at the Soviet Union, they actually, and here's part of the planful part of this, is they had a whole series of anti-Zionist conspiracy theories. And by the way, with the fall of the Soviet Union, you can actually see some of these things in the archives, although now they're being scarfed up again and it's harder to get them, but literally made up stuff about how Jews are trying to oppress liberation movements that makes, again, no sense. And these theories became adopted by universities, particularly in the behind the Iron Curtain, but many thought leaders on the far left inherited these theories, spruced them up, and again made them, over the period of years, somehow Jews being central to all sorts of bad stuff happening. And I talk about one in the book who's a leading thought leader, Angela Davis, who's a professor who is an important civil rights leader and has said many, many important things. But when it comes to the Jews, she's the one who has publicized Ferguson as Gaza. Well, Ferguson is not Gaza, let me tell you that for sure.
Right.
But she has basically taken those Soviet views and repackaged them sort of for a modern environment, which is not actually a huge surprise given that she received her PhD from behind the Iron Curtain.
There's no better gift to give or receive than one that can connect you with nature and your homeland. JNF has made it super easy for you to order your tree certificate online. Just go to jnf.org/trees, pick which special occasion it's for, order your tree online, and let's get planting. Every tree counts.
So when people read The Conspiracy U, what do you want them to understand? What do you want them to take away and actions to follow?
So here's what I really want people to do, because 99% of these conspiracy theories, and I don't exaggerate, if they're just given a tad of thought, they fall apart. The notion that somehow police officers who are attending a seminar run by an Israeli consulate somehow get converted into rabid anti-Black people, rabid racists, and somehow a decade later, Israel is responsible for atrocities committed to African Americans in the United States is crazy. You have to assume, like Arthur Butts, that somehow being around Jewish people is dangerous. There are other examples, the Ferguson is Gaza example. There are no two, other than existing on planet Earth, you really can't create any commonalities between Ferguson, a town in Missouri that had a population that was resisting a local police department, to Gaza, which is on the other side of an international border and is freely sovereign if they choose to be. There's just not even any sense to it.
But how do these conspiracy theories gain ground?
So first of all, and this is the point, this is actually the central point of the book, which is we have to start thinking for ourselves. We have to evaluate facts. A lot of facts are just thrown away when it comes to the Jews. And it's pretty remarkable. It's a corruption, it's an intellectual corruption. And one point I do make is that it doesn't stop with the Jews. And that's why I think it's important for everybody, Jew, Christian, Muslim, atheist, nuns, whatever, to really focus on this issue, because yes, we're the canary in the coal mine. We don't want to be the canary that dies either.
Right.
But there are important repercussions of this once a society becomes untethered from facts and evidence and conspiracy theories take hold. Well, there's really no end to the harm that can be caused. So you get phenomena today like QAnon. You get phenomena where, like, frankly, the hardcore anti-Zionist movement, which thinks it's okay to eradicate all Jews from the river to the sea. And if they happen to be dead, that's okay too. And yet that exists freely and openly and is somehow given the crown of intellectual academic freedom to say, Jews should be dead. I talk about one professor at Northwestern who venerates Hassan Nasrallah, who is pretty open about the fact that he would like, or pretty open about his view that every last Jew on the planet should be dead. But it's okay to say he's a great guy and put him in the same boat as Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi and other great world leaders. It is crazy, and if you give it a little bit of thought, it opens up. It's okay to oppose Israel policy. I oppose 3 things a day that Israel does, but it's not okay to say, let's end Israel because we don't like it.
So what's our pathway?
Well, I think we have to stand up and recapture our own vocabulary. I mean, Zionists are not settler colonialists. We have something that, whether you're a believer or not, we have something called the Bible that indicates that Jews were there. We have something called archaeology, which now there's a new group called minimalists that are throwing out archaeology because, it's just inconvenient. Mm-hmm. But there are archaeological remains that are really not disputable, that Jews have been indigenous to the land of Israel for at least 3,000 years, about 3,000 years. We need to reclaim, and by the way, we need to teach Jewish history. I've asked young Jews about the history, some questions about the history of the Jews, and it's so Eurocentric. Many have no idea that most of the Jews who were banished from Israel by the Romans ended up in a near diaspora and are the Mizrahi Jews, and that more than half of the Jews in Israel are descendants from Jews from Arab lands who were in the near diaspora. People don't know that. People think that Jews have been in Russia for thousands of years.
We have to educate. College, it's a little late.
College is way late. Well, I've been very involved in wanting to get more Jews to Israel as teens. College is way too late.
So we have to do that more as teens. We have to educate. We have to talk proudly about who we are as a Jew. Use the facts not as arguments against something else, but just about how proud it is that we are, that we do have the archaeological finds, that we do have the Bible, that we do have all these facts in our place, and it's a proud thing to be.
It's a proud thing to be, and I think the other thing we have to say, because immediately if you say some of these things, and I've had some of these arguments, I'm dismissed, or people who say this are dismissed as, far right-wing reactionary Zionists, et cetera, et cetera. But personally, there's no question in my mind the Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel. But at the same time, I think Palestinians who came from Arabia sometime after the Muslim conquest have historical rights. And I think we have to acknowledge that too. And we're only going to get to peace if both sides recognize that there are claims to the land. They may be very different claims, again, but I think the demonizing the Jews, saying no Jews from the river to the sea, well, we're never going to get peace. And anybody who thinks we're going to get peace that way, the only way they want peace is by, again, expelling or exterminating every last Jew in the region. And by the way, that's never happened. Throughout history, throughout the last 3,000 years, there have always been Jews in the land of Israel.
Are you looking for that perfect gift? The one thing you know that they won't have? Now you can honor someone you love and participate in the sacred act of writing a Torah. You can go online and choose a letter, word, verse, or more in a Torah being written right here in Israel on top of Masada. A beautiful certificate will be sent, signifying the link to our ancient past, and be something that they can keep forever. It's the ideal gift for birth, bar and bat mitzvahs, birthdays, engagements, weddings, anniversaries, and other milestones in life.
So, Scott, I'm going to ask you to talk to the Scott Shays out there, because I think at the beginning of the conversation, you talked about being a proud alum. Mm-hmm. And there's so many college students that we put a lot of burden on. that they got to stand up. You got to stand. We have a lot of alumni
Yep.
who have no problem supporting the football teams and supporting the chemistry classes, and I'm not telling you not to do whatever you want to do with your philanthropic dollars, but talk to the Scott Shays out there, the proud alum. What do they have to do to give us a wake-up call to their universities, not to just put that onus about the anti-Zionist movement that's happening on college campus to a sophomore who shows up?
You know, that is such a good and important point, because I think too much pressure is put on the college students, who, many of which just want to learn chemistry. I will say this, and I talk about this in the book. I both reached out to some of the Northwestern trustees at the time, and some reached out to me. And they were just so diffident about talking to and confronting the university. They were willing to take whatever they got. And for many, being a trustee of a university is it's like being made a knight in the UK or something. It's really honorific, and they think that that's sort of where it stops. They should think twice. I talked to the chairman of the board, a layperson of a top 25 university, and this person is involved in the Jewish community. You'd probably immediately recognize. Many people would know various names of these folks. And there was a lot of BDS activity going on. And I asked, well, what are you doing about this? And his answer was nothing. He was happy to be chair of the board. And to a certain degree, I think many people have been coaxed, co-opted, whatever the word is, because maybe they like 50-yard line seats at the college. And having these conversations is so uncomfortable, and immediately free speech and academic freedom is thrown up. Well, it's not academic freedom to lie. It's not academic freedom to take words and to say that there's something else. It's not academic freedom to call Jew settler colonialist when there's plenty of archaeological facts otherwise. That's not okay. And it's so sad, because their reluctance to confront administrations, faculty on conspiracy theories masquerading as scholarship essentially gives credence to further corruption of intellectual standards. So it is so distressing. I definitely call on anybody involved with universities to, as alumni, as donors, as trustees, to bring this message out. You may not get those 50-yard line seats again, but you're actually doing something that is important for the future of our society, not just the Jews.
So Scott Shay, Conspiracy U, a leader who took us and has taken us and continues to lead us. And Scott Shay, continue the conversation, continue giving us the facts, continue telling the story. It's so important, and it's such an honor to have you as part of this and a movement of the Zionist movement, the Jewish movement, and the Jewish community of today and tomorrow.
Thank you so much.